Well, before we begin, let's not forget our theme verse for Joshua. So let's read this together. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Great verse. I hope you memorize it, put it to memory. That sums up a lot of what is going on here in Joshua. Well, has anybody ever heard of hellfire and brimstone preaching? Yeah, that instead of preaching love, it's a lot of preaching. You will go to hell unless you love Jesus. It's kind of a forgotten art a lot, not used a lot these days. People don't like that. Don't like to be told they're going to hell. And not in a handbasket, just going to hell. It makes people uneasy, right? To look at God's judgment, to look at God's wrath. Today's world, we like to focus in on the love of God, which is important, but a big part of who God is. It's not just His love, it's His wrath. But something we don't always cover on a lot anymore. There's a really famous sermon out there back in the early 1700s by a pastor named Jonathan Edwards. The title of the sermon is Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. You probably won't see many people title their sermons today, these days like that. You can go online and just Google it and get a copy of it. It's a great sermon. I just realized I have these out of order, so bear with me. Okay, so there's a quote from it. Just imagine hearing this in today's church. The bow of God's wrath is bent, and the arrow made ready on the string, and justice bends the arrow at your heart and strains the bow, and there is nothing but the mere pleasure of God, and that of an angry God, without any promise or obligation at all, that keeps the arrow one moment from being made drunk with your blood. We can go, wow, but that's a pretty good illustration. God's wrath, God's anger is something we don't look at. Imagine if, I'll be honest, I was like, man, I'd be uncomfortable saying that. I could quote someone, but it's like, whew, that gives me the heebie-jeebies, and it should. It's not something we talk about a lot in today's culture. There's a website I use for helping pick out songs because it has it by topics. It has rows of topics. You can click on that, like mercy or grace or loneliness, surrender, like that. And it's categorized all the songs out, including hymns, praise song, everything that goes with that theme. So I went on there to take a look because that's predominantly modern praise songs. It has some hymns, but most predominantly. And under the love category, there's 12,736 songs that go under the love category. Then I looked for the wrath category. They don't even have a wrath category. So I looked at, synonyms. Okay, they have Judgement had 177 songs that talk about judgment. Justice, 152. There's probably a lot of copies among those songs. Then I looked at, what about heaven and hell? Let's look at heaven and hell. Well, heaven has 2,799 songs. Hell has 8 songs. So, we are to worship God, but part of our worship is proclaiming biblical truths. And it sounds like our songs are awfully skewed. Because we don't like to talk about God's judgment. But it's a fact, especially when we're getting to where we are in Joshua. Getting into some pretty stuff. Conquests and executions. So the next few weeks we're going to be talking a lot about God's judgment, God's wrath, and what in the world is going on with wiping out all of these cities, all of the people in the cities. We're going to talk about that over the next couple of weeks. Today we're going to be focusing on a couple of gruesome executions. Is this really the act of a loving God? How can a loving God do this? Well, we got to remember part of love is you also have to have the opposite of hate. God hates sin, and that's what we're going to see today in our passage. So, if you got your Bibles, let's open up to Joshua 10. We're going to start in verse 16 through 27. I just realized my lights were off. 16 through 27. It's page 186 in the Pew Bible, the black Bible in front of you. Everyone use that. We covered last week the longest day. I realized I should have titled my sermon that. Everyone remembers the old World War II movie, The Longest Day, about D-Day. The longest day. Remember when the 5 kings were threatened by Israel, led by the king of Jerusalem, and they went up and attacked Gibeon. Right? And the Gibeon sent messengers over to Joshua Gilgal, and he sent men over. The whole nation came over and they attacked. But before they attacked, God said, hey, by the way, I'm winning this battle for you. Just do your part. I'm winning it, so don't worry about it. And part of that, he sent them into a panic, and all the Canaanites flee. Talking about the hailstones, the stones coming from heaven and wiping out the army. More people died from the hailstones than by the sword that day. And then there was still more slaughter to be done, so Joshua stopped to pray, Lord, make this day last a little longer, please, so we can finish this battle. And God heeded the prayer and stopped the rotation of the universe so that his people could finish the battle. Pretty crazy that God would do that. But it is our all-powerful and creative universe, God would do that. And they have chased that people away. And we ended last week with Joshua returning to Gilgal with his army. Now we're going to pick it back up in verse 16 of Joshua 10. Let me pray before I read. Oh, Father, as we come to your holy word, Father, we pray for you just to open our hearts and minds, open our hands to receive your word. So it'll change the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act. Lord, we pray that now in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Joshua chapter 10, verse 16. These 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave at Makkedah. And it was said to Joshua, told to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave in Makkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones across the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies. Attack their rear guard. Do not let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. And when Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the fortified cities, then all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against my people. Eyes look blurry right now. Okay. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. And they did so, and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave. The king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And when they brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with them, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight." And afterward, Joshua struck them and put them to death. And he hanged them on 5 trees. And they hung on the trees until evening. At the time of the going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the tree and threw them into the cave where they were hidden themselves. And they set large stones against the mouth of the cave, which remains to this very day. So Joshua had gone back, taking the army back to Gilgal. They had been over at Hebron, about 20 miles or so, about a 4,000 foot increase in elevation, going from Gilgal to Gibeon. And then the retreat had gone along here, and the Makeda is right about here, where the caves are. So it's probably that we're maybe the Gibeons that are attacking them, because it's all of Israel went back to Gilgal. And then they get word. Remember, the Israelites didn't know this area. They've been in Egypt for hundreds of years, in the wilderness for 40 years. They didn't know the land as well as these neighboring people. So the kings knew where to hide out, but they found out where they were. So they attacked them. And Joshua used a great strategy here. Hey, let's just hold them up, roll stones across the holes there, and let's keep going after the army, because they're not going anywhere. We don't need to spend our time with them right now. Let's go after the army. And they kept going after the army because, hey, it's better to wipe out the army, attack it, engage it in open fields versus behind city walls. Good, sound military strategy. So they wiped out a large part of the army. A remnant made it back to the fortified cities, which isn't going to make much of a difference. We'll find out next week when Joshua comes through with his armies. But then after he's chased the army and scattered it back to the cities, then Joshua goes back. And that's when the judgment comes out on these kings. He calls the people together. And he brings the king of 5 kings out and executes them. And then hangs them up as an example. That's common back then in that world. Maybe just like we used to have public hangings back in the Old West days and before that as an example to deter people. That's what Israel did. They executed these kings and hung their bodies up as an example to, hey, look what happens when you come against the people of God. And then a bit of irony here, I love it right at the end. The very caves that the kings ran to hide in the hope they wouldn't be found were now their graves. They took their corpses back and threw them back in the graves. Love that little poetic justice there as they're hiding out. But here we see a great example of God's judgment. The first thing we're going to see about God's judgment is that it can't be avoided. It cannot be avoided. I mean, these kings have been defeated in battle. They probably still had their bodyguard with them. That could have been another reason to kind of bypass the cave. Don't want to have to deal with the king's bodyguard. Just lock them up in the cave, come back to them. But they had managed to escape the hailstones and the swords of Israel in the first battle. Here in the second one, though, they're hiding. They want to avoid it. Hey, that's a great strategy, isn't it? There's hailstones falling from the sky, so where's a good place to go? Hey, makes sense. That's what I would do if I was scared for my life. That's what the kings do. They go hide in the cave and try to hide away. I was probably trying to wait for the army of Israel to disperse, the army of the Gibeonites to disperse so they can make it back to the cities. But they are found out. They are found out. And judgment is done, no matter how much they try to avoid it. I mean, guys, see, for us, for us, God's judgment is unavoidable. God's judgment is unavoidable for us, especially for unbelievers. We jump to Revelation. Crazy. I think I copied over my verse. I did. Okay. I'll look it up real quick. Look, Revelation, chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20, 11 through 13. This is the judgment after all the battles are over, after the battle of Armageddon, of Gog and Magog, right before the institution of the new heavens and the new earth. We have the judgment before the great white throne, the Bema seats. So Revelation chapter 23, verse 11, and I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. And books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead and who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. That's the judgment for the unbelievers. Death and Hades given up. There's another judgment coming for them. But there's also, even those who are in Christ, those who are following Christ, will have judgments. Romans 14. This is Paul writing to the church in Rome. Why do you pass judgment on your brother? Or you, why do you despise your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So each of us will give an account of himself to God. That is to Christians. You're going to stand before God. Now, you won't be facing the judgment of whether you're going to be cast in the lake of fire or not. It'll be a judgment of how things are going to be for you in heaven. It'll be great. But there's still going to be a judgment there. Paul again in 2 Corinthians. So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. Sorry, there is no way to escape God's judgment. It is going to come on us. Now, when we try to think about God's wrath, like God's judgment, we tend to react in one of several ways. When we think of God's wrath, God's judgment, we sometimes we like to think if we don't think about it, then it won't happen. Kind of like the ostrich sticking its head in the sand. If I don't see it, if I don't hear it, then it's not going to happen. I don't need to worry about it. But it's not going to change the fact it's going to happen. I think if we look at prepping for wildfire prep, and say there's a fire started, we know it's coming. Now, if you knew a fire was coming towards your house, would you sit inside and go, if I just think hard enough that it's not going to come, it won't come? No. But yet, people try to think about that with God's wrath, God's judgment. Some people, when they think about God's wrath, they choose to not care about it. They think, God is this. It's not a big deal. They intentionally downplay God's judgment. It's like having that forest fire coming to your house and going, it's still far enough away. I don't need to do anything right now. It's still a couple miles away. I got time. It doesn't change the fact that wildfire's coming if you choose to be just ignorant about it and not care about it. We can look at God's judgment and we can recognize it for what it is. We can see that wildfire coming to our house and realize, yep, That wildfire is coming to our house. But then people react in two ways after that. They'll recognize, yeah, God's judgment's coming, but I'm still going to thumb my nose at it. Because I don't like to surrender. I don't like to think, I need this. Or do we acknowledge God's judgment for what it is? We see that it's coming. There's no way to avoid it. And instead, do we come before God and surrender our lives to Him? Say, Lord, I am a sinner. I deserve that wrath that's coming. I deserve every ounce of that judgment that's coming. But I acknowledge the price that Christ paid on the cross for that. For my judgment, that wrath that I deserve, that Christ took upon Himself instead. We accept that free gift. We've got to understand that God's judgment is unavoidable. It is a wildfire coming. It's like a wildfire to be properly prepped. Probably the little witty saying, Jesus is the ultimate fire insurance. Referring to hell as the ultimate fire. Jesus is a good insurance way out of that. It's coming, so what are you going to do about it? Don't trick yourself into thinking it's not a big deal. It is. What are you going to do about it? You can't avoid it. Another thing about God's judgment is it's absolute. It's absolute. Nothing else that can question it. Now, when Joshua came back for the kings, he pulled them out. He said, open them out of the caves. And they did so, and they brought the kings out. And he summoned the men of Israel. He said, come near, put your feet on the necks. That is like humiliating for the king. But just think of the judgment. To us going, oh, that's so mean. How would he do that? That is judgment. That is wrath being poured out on them. They stood on the necks. And then Joshua killed them. Joshua struck them and put them to death, and he hanged them on the trees. And then they threw them in the caves. It is absolute. These kings did not have a say in the matter. They were going, wait. They couldn't say, I appeal to Caesar, because there was no Caesar. They couldn't say, wait, I want Judge Judy to hear my case. Sorry, there wasn't a Judge Judy. It was Joshua. Joshua's judgment. Acting according to the commands of God, he carried out the judgment, and it was absolute. No negotiations. It's done. Isn't that too harsh? Remember that these kings were the main opponents of God. They had plotted together. They had connived together to annihilate Israel. They had actively gone against Israel. Its modern equivalent will be, the Nazis trying to wipe out the Jews. They actively went after them. Or the Emperor Nero in the Roman days, actively, intentionally killing Christians. These kings were evil. They deserve God's wrath. Just because we have it nice here in America, we don't have to face the persecution that people face around the world. Can't forget how evil is. Having our laws and rights infringed upon is nothing compared to losing your life, what's happening around the world. And also remember that these kings had access to the same information that Rahab did. Rahab had the same knowledge of what was going on with Israel and what was going on with God as these kings did. And what did Rahab do? She turned to God. She followed God. She was saved because of it. These kings, with the knowledge of the exact same thing that God had been doing, they go against it. They deserve God's judgment. God's wrath. Going back to Revelation, finishing out the judgment against the unbelievers. It says, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. God's judgment is absolute. And we think of the cases we have in our current judicial system, which is nothing like God's judicial system. But a case will go through a lower court hearing. If they don't like it, they can appeal to the next higher. And they can go to, if it's federal, they can go to the Court of Appeals or the next higher state court. And if they don't like that, then they can appeal to the next higher, all the way up, to the state Supreme Court or even to the national Supreme Court, right? And that's like the ultimate authority. Now we got to understand that when God judges us, there isn't a higher court we can appeal to. He is the Supreme Court of the universe. Okay? His judgment is absolute. His judgment is final. When we die, we're either going to go to heaven if we're following Jesus, or we will go to hell if we're not. There's no purgatory where we try to work out our salvation and gain access and pay the price for our own sins and get access to heaven. None of that. There's no praying for someone who has already died to pray them into heaven. Sorry. Judgment has already been done. The ruling is final. So we see that God's judgment cannot be avoided. It is absolute. But it's also meant to motivate us. It's interesting verses, man. Right smack here in the middle, verse 24, 26. When they brought the kings out, and Joshua had his men stand on the necks of the kings. And he says in verse 25, and Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you're fighting. And afterward Joshua struck them and put them to death. He hanged. Not only was the execution of the kings an example to the enemies of Israel, he pulls his men together and says, hey, remember when God said he was going to guide us to this? This execution is a reminder of that. Be strong and courageous. These guys are facing God's judgment. He wants to motivate his men meeting out this judgment. Honestly, it kind of sounds a little weird to me when I first say it, but it's there. Now, I do want to say, because I don't want anyone to think this, or please no one do it, that we should be going around judging people to motivate ourselves, okay? And especially don't go around executing people that deserve God's wrath. This office of Joshua meeting at the execution was a special office that Moses had passed to Joshua. That no longer applies to us. So please, don't go around saying, I judge you and I feel so much better. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's God's judgment, not ours. That's meant to motivate us. We are no longer to judge the unbelievers. It still gives us warnings about, looking at people within the church, but as far as the unbelievers, that's up to God. Go to Romans 12:19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. So for us, instead of us giving out God's wrath and God's judgment, his vengeance, we instead do the opposite. We are to offer both sides of the job. We are to forgive 70 times 7. We are to repay no evil with evil. We are to avenge nothing. We are free to live with peace and gentleness because God is the avenger. God is the one that will mete out his judgment. God is the one who repays every evil act of sin and rebellion with his righteous vengeance. But for those who have humbled themselves on the cross, the wrath of the avenger for our sins has fallen upon Christ. For the unrepentant, those who don't believe, who continue to live in rebellion against God, the eternal fires of hell await them, and the wrath of God. How does this motivate us? I mean, look at the Psalms. I mean, if you read through the Psalms, how often does he cry out for the justice of God to come to his defense? And he can cry out because it's going to be done. Psalm 94, verse 1 says, O Lord, God of vengeance, O God of vengeance, shine forth. God's shining vengeance is his level-headed. That's another thing. When we think of wrath, I think of it in human terms. You see someone who's mad, is wrathful, they often lose control, right? That's not the wrath of God. Because God never loses control. It is the level-headed, righteous response to sin. It is his holy sanity. It is a revelation of himself that we are called to worship. The one who has and will again break the evil and break it forever. To motivate us to know what happens, no matter what happens to us in this life, God's judgment will come. And it will be done. He is the absolute. Reminds us that none of us can escape the power of sin and its consequences. We cannot escape the reality that we are all guilty of rebelling against Christ. But God is the avenger of all that rebellion. 2 Thessalonians 1:8. But God will inflict vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord. The judgment's coming. It's going to come. It's unavoidable. What are you going to do about it? When you acknowledge that it is absolute. When we surrender our lives to Christ, accept the price he paid for our wrath. So instead of facing the wrath of God, we can be accepted into the family. We'll still face the judgment, but it won't be a judgment-filled wrath, or a wrath-filled judgment. I let it to motivate us. As we see the evil in this world, we see it around us, we see it done to ourselves, we see it done to our family, to our friends, to our neighbors. We know it's all right. It's not up to me to do that. Because God will take care of it, man. That can help us and encourage us for what happens in our lives. But first, make sure that we are on the right side, that we are following God, that we have that fire insurance in Jesus, that we won't face the judgment, the wrath of God. Let's pray. Oh, Father, as we come to you and worship you, we're so thankful. Oh, weird saying it, Lord, but I am thankful for your judgment. I'm thankful that you are a just God. Lord, just as you love us, Lord, you balance by justice, by your wrath, and you hate sin. Father, as we live our lives, we acknowledge we're sitting in the privacy of our home. No one else around. What are we doing? We want to be like the ostrich and stick our head in the hole, or be like those that think, oh Lord, it's a long way off. I don't have to worry about it. And let that kind of thinking influence how we're living right now. More, Lord, are we in the privacy of our homes, when we're at work, when we're out with friends, we're reminded about how your justice is coming. Your judgment is coming. And even if we are following you, Lord, we are still going to be judged by what we did with our lives here. As we think about that, does that motivate us? As we sit alone in our homes, are we looking at, Lord, I don't know, be on the good side of the judgment, not on the bad side? And stir us. Motivate us. And Lord, are we then also comforted by the fact that your judgment is unavoidable, that it's absolute, and it gives us comfort because you are in control of this world. As we see evil going around, we see evil going on, Lord, it's not up to us. We do not repay evil for evil. It's not our office to judge others. That's your job. We are to love and to forgive and to spread your word. So, Father, I pray that we find comfort in that too. Lord, I ask everything in Jesus' name. Amen.